I didn't want to get out of the car. The gravel crunched softly beneath the tires as I pulled into the old driveway, but the engine's hum felt too loud, too final. I sat there, hands clenched around the wheel, staring at the house I had once called home. It was my grandmother's place. 2 stories of creaky floorboards and sun-bleached curtains, perched on the edge of a pine forest that never seemed to age. She had passed away 6 months ago. I hadn't been back since. And yet, the front door was open, not wide, just enough to unsettle me. Just enough to make me wonder if I was already too late for something I couldn't name. I stepped out slowly, every muscle in my body aching from the long drive and the longer months that had stretched out behind me like shadows. I'd left the city, my job, my relationship, all of it, without a plan. People said I was brave. Truth was, I was just exhausted. And now I was here. The air smelled like pine needles, old wood, and something I hadn't realized I missed. Silence. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely louder than the breeze. "Is someone here?" "No," answer. I pushed the door open with the side of my arm, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. The hallway was just as I remembered it. Crooked photo frames, a bowl of smooth stones on the credenza, the quilted runner on the staircase that always slipped when you stepped too fast. Everything was still, and yet I didn't feel alone. Then I heard it, a shuffle, a breath, a soft, hopeful whine. I turned, and there he was. Buddy, the golden retriever, stood at the end of the hallway, half in shadow. His coat had dulled a little since I'd last seen him. But his eyes, oh, those eyes. They still held that molten, honey-like warmth that had once melted every wall I ever put up. I hadn't cried at the funeral. I hadn't cried when I packed my apartment, quit my job, left my keys on the counter. But now, staring at this dog with his tail gently sweeping across the wooden floor, something cracked. "Buddy," I whispered. He patted forward, cautious, but sure, like he wasn't entirely convinced I was real. When he reached me, he sat. I crouched to meet him. He leaned his head into my chest like no time had passed at all, like I hadn't abandoned everything, including him. I thought. "Someone would have taken you," I said softly, stroking the soft fur behind his ears. "I didn't know you. We're still here." He didn't answer, of course, but he didn't need to. Buddy had never been one for barking or theatrics. He was the quiet kind, the kind who stayed in the room when you cried but didn't look away, the kind who knew when to lie at your feet and when to leave you be. And somehow, it seemed he had been waiting. I stood slowly, blinking away the sudden sting in my eyes. The room still smelled faintly of lavender, and something sweet I couldn't place. Buddy trotted ahead of me into the living room, his nails clicking lightly on the floor, as if giving me silent permission to follow. I did. There was a dent in the couch cushion. His, obviously. A throw blanket askew. A half-chewed rope toy under the table. I noticed the food bowls in the kitchen had been refilled recently. I frowned. "Has someone been coming by to feed you?" Buddy didn't respond. He curled up on the rug and looked at me with a kind of resigned patience, the way only animals can. Like he knew I needed to ask the question, even though the answer didn't matter. I sat down next to him, the silence stretching like a thread between us. A loose piece of sunlight spilled through the window and lit up the dust in the air, turning it into gold. I didn't know why I was here. Not really. Not then. I told myself I just needed a break, that this was temporary, that I'd fix the leaking roof, sell the house, and return to the city once I'd cleared my head. But Buddy looked at me like he knew better, and maybe he did. The next few hours blurred together. I found clean sheets in the linen closet, a few canned goods still in date. The fridge, strangely, was stocked. Someone must have been checking in. I'd find out who later. For now, I let the rhythm of familiarity soothe the raw edges of my nerves. Buddy followed me through every room. Not clingy, not anxious. Just there. A steady presence. When I unpacked my single duffel bag and placed it on the old bench at the foot of the bed, he jumped up onto the covers without hesitation, curling up like he'd always belonged there. I didn't have the heart to move him, I guess. "You're staying in here with me, huh?" I asked. He opened one eye and blinked slowly. That was his answer. I turned off the light. That night, I didn't sleep well. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft rhythm of Buddy's breathing. Every time I closed my eyes, old memories came rushing back. The smell of burned toast, the creak of the floor in the hallway, the sound of my grandmother's humming as she watered the plants. And yet, the thing that held me most was the weight of Buddy's silent loyalty. When the sun rose and spilled pale gold into the room, I rolled onto my side. He was already watching me, not in a creepy way, not in that too intense way dogs sometimes do. It was gentler than that, curious, steady, like he was making sure I was still here. I reached over and ran my fingers along his fur. He gave a soft sigh and closed his eyes again. That morning, as I made coffee in the kitchen, Buddy sat by the door, ears pricked. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I poured a second bowl of kibble, found the leash hanging by the hook, unused but clean, and opened the door to the backyard. He bounded outside, tail high, ears flopping. Followed. The grass was overgrown, the garden beds had gone wild, but Buddy didn't care. He darted through the yard like a pup, circling the trees, nosing through the bushes, rolling in the patches of sun. I laughed. For the first time in months, I laughed. And when he stopped and turned back toward me, tongue out, eyes shining, I swear I saw it. That look, the one that said, "You came back." I knew you would. I didn't say anything out loud. But deep inside me, something answered. I couldn't say no. And you knew it, didn't you, boy? He watched me fall apart. The days blurred together. I found myself falling into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Wake up, feed Buddy, take a walk through the woods behind the house, come back and stare at the empty walls as if they could answer the questions I was too afraid to ask. I hadn't told anyone I was back in town, not even my parents. I needed space. I needed silence. Buddy never pushed me. He didn't beg for attention or bark for games. He just existed beside me, steady, patient, present. It was both comforting and unbearable, that quiet kind of love. Sometimes I wished he would leave me alone, but he never did. On the fourth day, I tried to clean out the attic. That was a mistake. It wasn't the dust or the boxes that got to me. It was the scent. That faint trace of rose water and lavender sachets my grandmother used to tuck into every drawer. One whiff and I was 12 again, crying into her sweater because some kid had made fun of my shoes. She had always been my safe place, and now she was gone. I sank to my knees between two cardboard boxes and buried my face in my hands. The tears came fast, ugly, without warning. Not the graceful kind you wipe away with a single tissue. These were the kind that stole your breath, that racked your shoulders, that cracked open every part of you you'd tried to keep together. I didn't even hear him come up the stairs. But suddenly, Buddy was there. He didn't bark or whine or nudge me. He just walked over and sat beside me, so close his side touched mine. I couldn't see him through my fingers, but I felt the heat of his body and the faint pressure of his fur against my leg. And somehow, that made me cry harder. Not because I was sad, because I wasn't alone. He didn't flinch when I leaned into him. I buried my face in his shoulder, sobbing like I hadn't since the day I left my apartment, left my job, left the life I'd built, or thought I had. He stayed perfectly still, his breath warm and steady. Eventually, the storm passed. I didn't apologize. I just sat there, staring at the old wooden beams of the attic, my cheek resting on his back. My fingers curled instinctively into his fur. I felt like a child again. Like everything I thought made me strong had been peeled away, and all that was left was the soft, tired truth. I didn't know who I was anymore. Buddy shifted slightly, laying his head on my lap. A soundless act of forgiveness, of grounding, of, I'm still here. I hadn't deserved that kind of loyalty. I'd run from everything, even him. I didn't want to come back, I whispered. I didn't think I could handle it. Buddy blinked up at me. I still don't know if I can, I admitted. But you're not letting me fall, are you? He didn't wag his tail. He didn't need to. That night, I left the attic untouched. We sat outside on the porch instead, wrapped in an old blanket as the sun dipped behind the trees. I cradled a mug of tea in both hands while Buddy sat beside me, his gaze locked on the horizon like a sentry. The wind rustled the tall grass. The crickets had begun their nightly song. I took a shaky breath. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Buddy didn't turn his head, but his ear twitched. Everything I thought I wanted. It doesn't mean anything now. I let the words hang in the air, unfinished. And I can't go back to who I used to be. There it was, the truth I hadn't said out loud until now. Buddy leaned against me just slightly, a small nudge that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. And I knew, in that moment, that he understood. Maybe not in the way a person might, but in that deeper instinctual way dogs always seem to. He didn't need words or reasons. He just knew that I was breaking, and he was here to make sure I didn't do it alone. That night, when I crawled into bed, Buddy climbed in beside me again without hesitation. I curled around him like he was the only thing tethering me to the earth, because in many ways, he was. I didn't fall asleep easily. My thoughts raced. Fragments of old conversations, regrets, flashes of a life that no longer fit. I thought of how many times I'd smiled just to keep the peace, how many choices I'd made for other people's comfort, how often I'd said yes when every part of me screamed no. And then I thought about how, when I stepped out of the car that first day, Buddy had already been waiting, like he'd known I was coming, like he'd never stopped believing I would. I couldn't say no, I thought again. And somehow, the shame that sentence once carried was now something softer. Something true. I hadn't come back for the house or the past. I had come back because a part of me, the quiet, hurting part, needed someone who wouldn't let me walk away again. I turned over and watched him sleeping. One paw twitched, as if chasing something in a dream. His face was peaceful, untroubled. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. Not healed, not whole, but safe. The next morning, I woke with the sun and the strange awareness that I hadn't cried in my sleep. That alone felt like a victory. Buddy was already at the window watching the backyard like a guardian. I sat up slowly, my body aching in all the places that told the truth. Stress in my shoulders, tightness in my chest, heaviness in my limbs. But under all that, there was a flicker of something else. A beginning. "You want to go for a walk?" I asked, my voice still raspy from sleep. His ears perked. I smiled. It wasn't much, but it was something. We walked the forest trail in silence. The trees were still damp with dew, the air crisp and clean. Buddy trotted ahead but always circled back, checking in on me like a compass that never let me get lost. At the edge of the clearing, I stopped and looked up at the sky. The world felt too big. But for once, that didn't scare me. Buddy sat beside me, his breath steaming in the cold morning air. "Thanks for yesterday," I murmured. He leaned his head into my leg. No theatrics, just presence. I rested my hand on his back. He didn't have to say anything. I knew he saw me, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself be seen. Every time I tried to leave, I told myself it was just a visit, just a break, a pause in the chaos of life. I told myself I'd stay a week, 2, tops, just long enough to sort out what came next. I even left my boxes, taped shut, my laptop still zipped inside its case, like I might open it any minute and slide back into the person I'd been. But the days kept passing, and the house, the quiet, creaky house with its sunlit corners and hidden grief, started to feel less like a reminder of what I'd lost and more like a space that asked nothing of me. Except, it wasn't just the house, it was Buddy. Every morning, I'd wake to the soft thump of his tail against the sheets. He'd trot beside me down the hallway, sit patiently as I made coffee, follow me outside without ever needing a leash. He knew my routines before I had any, knew when I needed space, when I needed touch, and when I needed silence more than anything. And still, I made plans to leave. Not dramatic ones, just little escape routes. I made lists, checked job boards, researched apartments back in the city. I told myself it was logical, practical. I couldn't live in limbo forever, but every time I tried to act on it, something stopped me. The first time was a Thursday. I had spent the entire morning convincing myself that I was ready. I showered, did my hair, even put on real jeans for the first time in 2 weeks. I looked in the mirror and practiced a smile I hadn't worn in months. "Just a drive," I whispered. "No big deal." I packed a bag, grabbed the keys, and headed for the front door. Buddy was already sitting there. He looked up at me, not accusing, not sad, just aware. His tail gave one soft thump against the floor. I froze. "I'm just going into town," I said, like I owed him an explanation. "I need to look at a few things." He didn't move, didn't blink, just stared at me with those deep amber eyes like he saw through the words I hadn't said. Like he already knew I wasn't ready. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob for a full minute before I sighed, dropped the keys back on the table, and sat down on the floor beside him. He laid his head on my knee. And just like that, I stayed. The second time was worse. I got a message from my old boss. A vague, friendly text that said, "You still thinking about coming back?" Which was code for, "We want you, but we won't say it out loud." My stomach twisted when I saw it. Part flattery, part dread. I didn't answer right away. That afternoon, I sat on the back steps while Buddy chased squirrels and rolled in a patch of dandelions like he didn't have a single worry in the world. I stared at my phone for an hour. Typed and deleted a reply a dozen times. "You could go back," I murmured to myself. "Pick up where you left off. Pretend none of this happened." Buddy wandered over and sat beside me. His fur was full of grass. His tongue lolled out the side of his mouth in a dopey, joyful grin. I wanted to cry. He nudged my hand gently with his nose, urging me to pet him. I did. "You don't care what I do you?" I asked. "As long as I'm here." He blinked, then rested his head on my lap. And that was the second time I stayed. I never answered the message. The third time was different. I was standing in the kitchen, flipping through the stack of unopened mail I'd been ignoring for weeks. One envelope stood out, thick, formal, with my name embossed on the front. It was from a nonprofit I'd once volunteered for. A dream job, the kind that would have made my 23-year-old self leap with joy. They had seen my old portfolio, remembered my name, and wanted to talk. My heart raced. Buddy sat by the kitchen door, watching. "Don't look at me like that," I said, laughing nervously. "This is good news. This is what I wanted." He tilted his head. Right? I added. "Isn't that the whole point of healing? So I can go back and actually live?" He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But as I stared down at the letter, something inside me twisted. I should have been thrilled. I should have called my parents, my friends, someone. But instead I felt hollow, like I was being offered a part in a play I no longer wanted to perform. I looked at Buddy. He stood slowly, walked across the floor and sat beside me. No fanfare. No judgment. I placed the letter on the counter and knelt beside him, wrapping my arms around his neck. And that was the third time I stayed. It was around then that I realized something. I hadn't walked away because I was weak. I hadn't stayed because I was afraid. I stayed because I was listening, maybe for the first time in my life, to the part of me that didn't speak in logic or plans, the part that whispered in sighs and silences, the part that responded not to pressure, but to presence. And Buddy, he had always known how to listen to that part of me. He didn't need my reasons. He just needed me to be real. One night, as we lay in bed together, the air thick with the sound of crickets and the low hum of the fan, I whispered into the dark, "Why do you always know when I'm about to leave?" He shifted slightly, pressing his body against mine. I ran my fingers through his fur and added, "I don't think I ever asked you if you wanted me to stay." Silence. I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You lost her too, didn't you?" I whispered. "My grandmother. The one who had loved us both without condition." Buddy didn't move, but I felt his breath, warm and steady, against my side. "Was the only one who never asked me to be anything other than what I was," I said. "And now you're doing the same." My voice cracked. And I think I don't know how to leave something like that behind again. But he turned his head and licked my arm. Just once. Gentle. Like a whisper that said, "Then don't." Closed my eyes. Maybe I didn't have to go back to my old life to find purpose. Maybe staying wasn't giving up. Maybe it was choosing a different kind of strength. And maybe, just maybe, I was allowed to want that. Not because I couldn't say no, but because I finally didn't want to. He led me there. Without a leash, it started with a look. That morning, Buddy sat by the front door, tail twitching slightly, eyes alert. I was still barefoot, half asleep, clutching my second cup of coffee. His collar lay on the table next to the leash, untouched. "You want to go out already?" I asked. He didn't bark, just looked at me. Calm, patient, insistent. I took a sip of coffee and leaned against the doorframe, studying him. "You know, I don't really feel like walking today." He tilted his head slightly, then looked at the doorknob. I sighed, set the mug down and grabbed his leash, but he took a step back. I paused. "You don't want it?" He stared. That stare, steady, unwavering. Like he was asking me to trust him. Not just with a walk, with something else, something bigger. Dropped the leash back on the table. "All right," I muttered. "Let's go without it." The screen door creaked open, and Buddy stepped out into the golden morning light. The grass was still wet with dew, the air sharp and fresh. I followed him barefoot across the porch, feeling the cool boards beneath my feet. He trotted ahead, not in his usual carefree loops, but with purpose. Head low, gait steady, focused. "Where are we going, boy?" I asked. He didn't answer, just glanced back to make sure I was following. We crossed the yard and slipped through the break in the fence that led to the woods. The path was faint, almost forgotten, overgrown with ivy and wildflowers. I hadn't walked this trail since I was a teenager. Buddy moved like he knew every twist of it. The trees closed in around us, their branches whispering above. Sunlight trickled through in soft streaks, dancing on the mossy floor. The hush of the woods wrapped around us like a blanket. I felt my chest loosen. It was a strange thing. Following someone who never spoke. Letting go of control. Letting something wordless lead you. Buddy darted left, then paused and looked back. I caught up. "You're really not going to tell me where we're going?" I joked. He wagged his tail once, then continued. The path grew steeper. Rocks jutted from the earth like forgotten bones, and I had to use tree trunks to steady myself. My breath grew shallow. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck. Still, Buddy climbed. And then, the clearing. I froze. It opened before us like a secret. A quiet, sunlit grove surrounded by old oaks, their limbs arching above like a cathedral. The grass was soft and golden, undisturbed. The light here was different, warmer, softer, holy almost. In the middle of it stood the tree. I gasped. I haven't seen this place in... I swallowed hard. 15 years. Buddy sat at the base of the tree and looked up at me. My legs trembled as I stepped into the clearing. Every leaf, every breath of wind seemed to carry the echo of my childhood. I touched the bark of the tree, worn smooth in places where I'd once climbed, once hidden. I remembered everything. This had been my hiding place. Whenever the world felt too loud, too cruel, I came here. My grandmother had discovered it once, purely by accident, when she followed me after school. Instead of scolding me, she sat on the grass beside me and said, "This is your quiet place, isn't it?" It was the first time I ever felt truly seen. I sank down against the trunk, hugging my knees to my chest. Buddy laid beside me, his body pressed to mine. "I forgot this existed," I said softly. He closed his eyes, peaceful. "I used to come here after school, remember?" My voice cracked. Back when I didn't have to be anyone but myself. Back when she was still alive. When you were just a pup. Buddy shifted, resting his head gently on my thigh. "I think I lost myself out there," I whispered. "In the city. In the job. In trying to be everything for everyone." The silence of the grove pressed against my skin, not heavy. Comforting. It didn't need an explanation. It didn't ask for performance. It just held me. I ran my fingers through Buddy's fur. I kept saying yes when I wanted to say no, I admitted. To people. To expectations. To all these versions of me that weren't real. He breathed in slowly, deeply. And somehow, I matched his rhythm. "You knew I needed to come back here," I said, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. "Didn't you?" I thought about the way he'd watched me these past weeks. Quiet, steady, how he'd waited for me to catch up to something he already knew. This hidden clearing, this pocket of peace, it was a mirror. Not of who I'd been, but of who I'd always been underneath everything. And Buddy had led me here without a leash, without pressure, without words. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't afraid of the stillness. I didn't need a plan, didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to be here. I don't know how long. We stayed. Time passed without meaning. The sun shifted, and the wind picked up gently. Birds sang above, their melodies threading through the canopy like lullabies. When I finally stood, I felt lighter, not fixed, but clearer. Buddy rose too, shaking out, his coat. "Thank you," I said. He wagged his tail once. As we walked back through the woods, I didn't lead. I followed. Not just Buddy, but that quiet knowing inside me that was finally speaking again. The house came into view, dappled in afternoon light. I looked at Buddy and said, "This is home now, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I couldn't say no. And he knew it. The email came on a rainy Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, watching rivulets of water trail down the window pane, my third cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Buddy lay curled at my feet, asleep but twitching, caught in one of his vivid dreams. Outside, the world looked like it was holding its breath. Then my phone vibrated. Subject, final offer. From Executive Director UrbanImpact.org. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Claire, we understand your need for time and space, but we're moving forward with team planning. This is a final offer for the creative director position, the same one you expressed interest in last year. Relocation package included. Competitive salary. Start date negotiable. We believe you'd bring something irreplaceable to the team. Let us know by Friday. R. My hand tightened around the phone. This was it. The thing I had once believed would make everything right. The job. The title. The next step. It was finally being handed to me. Not just as a possibility, but as a promise. Buddy stirred beneath the table, stretching and yawning like he'd sensed the tension before I could even name it. I looked at him. "What do I do, huh?" he patted, closer and sat by my chair, his eyes scanning my face with that same steady, unblinking gaze he always wore when something mattered. "I asked for this," I whispered. "You know I did." Buddy just stared. I pushed my chair back and stood abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen. My thoughts were a mess. Flashes of city lights, deadlines, the hum of subway stations, the burn of late nights under fluorescent bulbs, and then flashes of this place, of golden mornings, pine needles, birdsong, of Buddy sitting beside me in silence. "It's everything I worked for," I muttered. "It's the end of the tunnel, isn't it?" But something inside me recoiled. The tunnel had changed. I had changed. The destination didn't feel like it used to, and then the power cut out. The house fell into a hush so deep it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Outside, thunder cracked. I moved to the window, but the backyard was hidden in sheets of rain. "Storm's getting worse," I mumbled. Then I heard it. A bark, sharp, urgent. I froze. Another bark, then a high-pitched whine. Buddy was no longer at my feet. "Buddy?" No answer, just the thump of paws racing toward the back door. I rushed after him and flung the door open. He was already outside. "Buddy, wait!" But he was running, full speed toward the tree line. Not playful, not exploring, focused. Panic sliced through me. Something was wrong. I grabbed my boots, pulled on the nearest jacket, and sprinted after him. The rain soaked me within seconds, cold and relentless. Mud sucked at my feet. Branches whipped against my face, but I didn't stop. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me, just the blur of golden fur weaving through the forest ahead. "Buddy," I screamed. "Come back!" He didn't, and that terrified me more than anything. He never ran like this, never ignored me. If he was running, it meant someone, or something, needed help. I followed him down the overgrown trail, heart pounding against my ribs. Then I heard it. A low whimper. Not Buddy. Higher. Younger. I rounded a bend, and there it was. A small dog, soaked, trembling, wedged between 2 fallen logs, its leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes were wide with fear, and it cried out again, pawing at the mud. Buddy was crouched beside it, nose pressed to its side, whimpering softly. "Oh my God," I breathed. I dropped to my knees in the mud. "Hey, it's okay," I whispered to the pup. "I've got you." It growled at first, weak, scared, but let me inch closer. I moved slowly, gently slipping my arms beneath its muddy body. It was light, fragile, shivering. I looked at Buddy. "How did you know it was here?" He didn't respond, just watched me, soaked to the bone, his chest heaving. There was no leash, no commands, just trust and instinct. I cradled the little dog against me and turned back toward home. Buddy stayed glued to my side the entire way, his body brushing mine, steady and warm. When we reached the porch, I wrapped the pup in a towel and laid it near the heater. Buddy laid down beside it, guarding it like he'd known it all his life. I stared at them both. The muddy fur, the steady breathing, the way one had led me to the other without hesitation. I turned and looked at my phone on the table. The job offer still blinked on the screen. And just like that, I knew. This was my answer. Not because I couldn't say no, but because I finally understood what I was saying yes to. Not the job, not the past, not the pressure to become someone who made sense on paper. I was saying yes to presence, to listening, to being, to Buddy, and to whoever else life placed in my path, lost, scared, or broken, like that little dog in the forest. I wiped the mud from my hands and sat down beside them, heart thudding not with fear, but with peace. A few minutes later, Buddy rested his head on my knee. I looked down at him. "You knew all along, didn't you?" He didn't blink, didn't wag his tail, just laid there, soaked, tired, watching me with eyes that carried more knowing than most people I'd ever met. I smiled through the tears. I couldn't say no. I reached down and cupped his face gently. "And you knew it."